She was supposed to smile, supposed to marry, supposed to survive one more night. Instead, Elara Vance collapsed at the most exclusive gala of the season, broken ribs finally giving out beneath silk and diamonds while her father's cold eyes watched from across the room. But she didn't hit the marble floor. A man she'd never spoken to caught her mid-fall, and in front of everyone who mattered, he said the 5 words that changed everything. "She stays with me tonight." What happened next wasn't a rescue. It was a declaration of war. Stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far Elara's story travels. The chandeliers above the Ashmont Grand Ballroom cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Elara knew this because her father had told her, twice, while adjusting her necklace in the car, his fingers pressing just hard enough against her collarbone to make breathing difficult. "You understand what tonight means," he'd said. Not a question. Never a question with Victor Vance. "Yes, father. And you'll do exactly as instructed." "Yes, father." His hand had lingered a moment longer before releasing her. "Good girl." Now standing beneath those glittering lights, Elara felt each breath like broken glass shifting inside her chest. The ribs on her left side, cracked 3 days ago when she'd failed to secure a meeting with the Ashford heir quickly enough, sent sharp bolts of pain through her torso every time she inhaled. She'd wrapped them herself in the bathroom, biting down on a towel to keep from screaming, because calling a doctor meant questions, and questions meant consequences far worse than cracked bones. The gown helped. Midnight blue silk with a structured bodice that held everything in place, that made her look elegant instead of damaged. Her stylist had woven diamonds through her dark hair, and the makeup artist had worked magic over the fading bruise along her jaw. From a distance, she looked exactly like what she was supposed to be. Victor Vance's perfect daughter, poised and polished and available. Up close, she was dying by inches. "Elara, darling," she turned carefully, always carefully, to find Margaret Whitmore gliding toward her, champagne glass in hand and curiosity bright in her eyes. Margaret collected gossip the way some people collected art, and she'd been circling Elara all season like a shark scenting blood. "Mrs. Whitmore." Elara managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You look stunning. Don't I always?" Margaret laughed, the sound like wind chimes made of knives. "But you, my dear, that dress is absolutely breathtaking, though you seem a bit pale. Are you feeling all right?" The concern was fake. Everything at these events was fake. The smiles, the compliments, the carefully constructed performances of people who'd perfected the art of looking human while feeling nothing. "Just tired," Elara said. "It's been a long week." "I imagine it has." Margaret leaned closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I heard your father's been introducing you to several very eligible prospects. The Carmichael boy, wasn't it? And that banker's son from New York?" Elara's smile felt like it might crack her face in half. "Father believes in keeping options open." "Smart man, your father, though between you and me," Margaret's eyes glittered with malicious delight. "I heard the Carmichael family is considering the Sutton girl instead. Apparently her dowry is quite impressive." The words landed exactly where Margaret intended them to. Elara felt her father's gaze from across the room like a brand against her spine. She didn't need to look to know he was watching, measuring, calculating her worth with every interaction. "How lovely for them," Elara managed. Margaret took a long sip of champagne, studying Elara over the rim of her glass. "You know, dear, you really should eat something. You're looking positively gaunt." "I can't eat because my stomach is one giant bruise from when he shoved me against the kitchen counter for laughing too loudly at breakfast." "I had a late lunch," Elara said instead. "But thank you for your concern." Margaret drifted away eventually, replaced by others. A parade of society matrons and their eligible sons, all of them sizing her up like livestock at auction. Elara smiled and nodded and said all the right things, while her ribs screamed and her vision blurred at the edges. At 9 o'clock, her father appeared at her elbow. "Walk with me." They moved through the crowd like sharks through water. Victor Vance, tall and distinguished in his tuxedo, silver threading through his dark hair, the picture of refined authority. Everyone smiled at him. Everyone respected him. No one knew. He guided her to a quiet alcove near the terrace doors, his hand on her lower back pressing against bruises that made her want to vomit. "The Hartford boy," he said without preamble. "Third conversation, northeast corner. He's been watching you all evening. Elara followed his gaze to a young man with sandy hair and nervous hands, currently trapped in conversation with his mother. He's 22, she said quietly. He's wealthy. His family owns half the textile mills in the state. Victor's voice was pleasant, conversational. Anyone watching would think they were discussing the weather. You'll dance with him, twice. You'll laugh at his jokes, and by the end of the evening, you'll have secured his interest enough that he asks to call on you tomorrow. Father, His hand tightened against her back. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to make her gasp. I've invested 23 years into you, Elara. 23 years of education, training, preparation. You have one job tonight, one. Do you understand? Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. What was that? Yes, Father? Good. He released her, his expression softening into something that might have passed for paternal affection to anyone who didn't know better. I have every confidence you'll make me proud. He walked away, leaving Elara standing alone in the alcove, trembling. She pressed a hand against her ribs and tried to breathe through the pain. The evening stretched ahead of her like a minefield, hours more of smiling and performing and pretending she wasn't falling apart from the inside out. Just get through tonight. Just survive until morning. The Hartford boy approached at 9:30, encouraged by his mother's none too subtle pushing. Up close, he smelled like expensive cologne and desperation. Miss Vance, he said, executing a clumsy bow, would you do me the honor of this dance? Elara looked past him to where her father stood watching, his expression pleasant and his eyes absolutely cold. I'd be delighted, Mr. Hartford. His hand at her waist made her want to scream. The movement of the waltz sent agony shooting through her ribs with every turn. But she smiled and laughed when he made an awkward joke about the weather, and she let him monopolize her attention through 2 full dances while the pain built and built and built. You're an excellent dancer, he said, clearly pleased with himself. You're too kind. Perhaps I could call on you tomorrow, if that wouldn't be too forward. Say yes. Smile. Secure his interest. I think that would be... The ballroom tilted sideways. Elara blinked, confused. The chandeliers had been above her a moment ago. Now they were spinning, brilliant and disorienting, while Hartford's face swam in and out of focus. Miss Vance, are you all right? She tried to answer, but her tongue felt thick and useless. The pain in her ribs had transformed into something molten, spreading through her chest like wildfire. Her knees buckled. Hartford yelped, actually yelped, as her full weight collapsed against him. He wasn't strong enough to hold her, or maybe he just didn't want to. Either way, Elara felt herself sliding from his grip, falling, the marble floor rushing up to meet her while the entire ballroom turned to watch. This is it. This is how it ends, humiliated in front of everyone. She didn't hit the ground. Strong arms caught her mid-fall, pulling her against a broad chest with surprising gentleness. The world stopped spinning, long enough for Elara to register several things at once. Expensive fabric against her cheek, the scent of cedar and smoke, a heartbeat steady beneath her ear. I've got you. The voice was low, rough-edged, unfamiliar. Elara forced her eyes open and found herself staring up at a face she'd only seen from a distance. Sharp features, dark eyes, a scar cutting through one eyebrow. Darian Wolfe, the Wolfe family's youngest son and most notorious member. The man society matrons whispered about in scandalized tones. The one Victor Vance had specifically told her to avoid because he's dangerous and unpredictable and entirely unsuitable. I can, she started to say, trying to push away from him. Don't! His arms tightened fractionally. You can barely stand. He was right. Her legs felt like water, and the pain in her ribs had reached a crescendo that made breathing nearly impossible. Around them, the entire ballroom had gone silent, hundreds of eyes watching the spectacle. Put me down, Elara whispered. Please. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. Darian shifted her weight in his arms, cradling her like she weighed nothing, and turned to face the crowd. His expression was calm, almost bored, but something dangerous flickered in his dark eyes. Victor Vance pushed through the gathering onlookers, his face a mask of paternal concern that made Elara's stomach twist. Mr. Wolfe, he said smoothly, thank you for catching my daughter. I'll take her from here. No. The single word cut through the ballroom like a blade. Victor's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. I beg your pardon? Your daughter just collapsed in the middle of a crowded ballroom, Darian said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. She needs a doctor, not another dance. So no, you won't be taking her anywhere. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't how things worked. You didn't contradict Victor Vance. You certainly didn't do it in public. Mr. Wolf, I appreciate your concern, but Elara is my responsibility. She stays with me tonight. The room went absolutely silent. Elara's heart hammered against her damaged ribs. This was insane. Darian Wolf didn't know her. They'd never even been introduced. And now he was standing in the middle of the Ashmont Grand Ballroom, holding her in his arms and publicly defying one of the most powerful men in the city. Victor's pleasant expression cracked just slightly around the edges. That's entirely inappropriate. So is sending your daughter to a social event when she can barely stand upright. Darian's gaze swept across the crowd, and Elara saw several people flinch under that cold stare. Anyone with eyes can see she's unwell. So here's what's going to happen. I'm taking her to my family's physician. He'll examine her, determine what's wrong, and ensure she receives proper care. You're welcome to join us, of course. I'm sure you're desperately concerned about her well-being. The challenge in those last words was unmistakable. Victor's jaw tightened. Around them, the whispers grew louder. This was a scandal in the making, the kind of public confrontation that could define reputations for years. And Victor Vance's entire identity was built on control, on maintaining the perfect image of the devoted father and upstanding citizen. If he pushed back now, if he demanded Elara return to him, he'd look callous, cruel even. But if he allowed Darian to take her, he'd lose control of the narrative entirely. Elara watched the calculation happen behind her father's eyes. The weighing of options, the measuring of consequences. Finally, Victor nodded, his smile returning like nothing had happened. Of course, her health is paramount. Please, do see that she receives the best care. Naturally. Darian turned and started walking, carrying Elara through the silent crowd like she was made of glass. People parted before them, their expressions ranging from shock to scandalized delight to genuine concern. As they passed Margaret Whitmore, Elara heard her whisper to her companion, "Well, that's certainly going to be the talk of the season." The cool night air hit Elara's face like a blessing as they stepped outside. Darian's driver appeared immediately, opening the door to a sleek black car. Carefully, Darian murmured, settling Elara onto the leather seat with surprising gentleness. She expected him to release her, to sit on the opposite seat and maintain proper distance. Instead, he kept one arm around her shoulders, supporting her weight as the car pulled away from the ballroom. "I don't understand," Elara finally managed. "Why did you—" "Because someone needed to." Darian glanced down at her, and something in his expression made her chest tighten for reasons that had nothing to do with broken ribs. "And because I know exactly what Victor Vance is." Elara's breath caught. "You don't know anything about—" "Your left hand is shaking. You're favoring your right side when you breathe. And there's a bruise under your jaw that your makeup artist tried very hard to cover." His voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. "You don't collapse at a society gala from exhaustion, Miss Vance. So either you're seriously ill or someone's been hurting you. And given your father's reaction just now, I'm betting on the latter." Tears burned behind Elara's eyes. She blinked them back furiously, refusing to let them fall. "You can't prove—" "I'm not interested in proving anything. I'm interested in making sure you don't die in the next 24 hours. Darian pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "My physician will meet us at the estate. He's discreet, competent, and he won't ask questions you're not ready to answer." "Your estate? You think I'm taking you to a hospital where your father can walk in anytime he wants?" Darian raised an eyebrow. "Please, give me some credit." The car wound through darkened streets while Elara tried to process what was happening. This was wrong. All of it. She should demand to be taken home, should insist everything was fine, should protect her father's reputation and her own future, because that's what she'd been trained to do for 23 years. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "Why are you helping me?" Darian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the window. "Because I know what it's like," he finally said, "to smile while you're dying inside. To perform for people who'd step over your corpse if it meant maintaining appearances." He looked at her then, and the understanding in his eyes was almost unbearable. And because no one helped me when I needed it, so maybe I can help you instead. The Wolf Estate appeared through the trees like something out of a Gothic novel, all stone walls and iron gates and windows glowing with warm light. The car pulled up to the main entrance, where an elderly man in a simple suit waited with a leather medical bag. "Dr. Morrison," Darian said as he carefully lifted Elara from the car. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, sir." The doctor's eyes swept over Elara with professional assessment, and she saw his expression tighten. "Let's get her inside." They moved through hallways lined with dark wood and oil paintings, up a grand staircase, into a bedroom that was larger than Elara's entire apartment. Darian settled her on a sofa near the fireplace, while Dr. Morrison set up his equipment. "I'll need to examine her," the doctor said quietly. "Alone, preferably." Darian nodded and started toward the door, but Elara's hand shot out, catching his sleeve. "Don't go!" The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him, but the thought of being alone with another stranger, of having to explain and justify and defend, she couldn't. Not tonight. Darian looked at Dr. Morrison, who shrugged. "If it makes her comfortable." So Darian stayed, standing near the window while the doctor gently examined Elara's injuries. Each touch, each probe, each carefully worded question felt like peeling back layers of carefully constructed lies. "The ribs are cracked, not broken," Dr. Morrison said finally, "but they need proper binding and you need rest. Complete rest, Miss Vance. No social events, no dancing, no activities that put strain on your torso." He paused, his eyes kind but unflinching. "May I ask how this happened?" Elara opened her mouth, closed it. The lies were right there, waiting to be deployed. "I fell down the stairs. I was in a car accident. I'm just clumsy." But when she looked up and saw Darian watching her with those knowing eyes, the lies stuck in her throat. "My father," she whispered. The room went very still. Dr. Morrison's expression didn't change, but she saw his hands tighten around his medical bag. "I see. And the other injuries?" "Also my father." "How long has this been going on?" Elara laughed, and it came out broken. "How long have I been alive?" Dr. Morrison and Darian exchanged a look she couldn't quite read. Then the doctor reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "For tonight, at least. You're safe." After he left, Elara sat in silence, while Darian poured amber liquid into 2 glasses. He handed her one, then settled into the chair across from her. "You don't have to go back," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." "Why?" "Because he'll destroy me if I don't. He'll tell everyone I'm mentally unstable. He'll freeze my accounts, revoke my access to anything I've ever known, and make sure no respectable family in this city will have anything to do with me." Elara took a sip of the drink, whiskey, smooth and burning. "I have no money of my own, no education that matters, no skills beyond looking pretty and saying the right things. If I leave him, I have nothing." "You'd have your life." "Would I?" Elara met his gaze. "Or would I just be trading one prison for another? At least I know how to survive with him, out there alone. I wouldn't last a week." Darian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What if you weren't alone?" "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Victor Vance's power comes from reputation and perception. From everyone believing he's this pillar of society, this devoted father." Darian's smile was sharp. "But reputations can be destroyed, and perceptions can change. You want to expose him. I want to give you options." Elara shook her head. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "I know exactly what men like him are capable of," Darian interrupted. "I also know they're not invincible. They just want you to think they are." She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that escape was possible, that there was a way out that didn't end with her broken and alone. But hope was dangerous. Hope got you hurt. "Why?" she asked again. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Darian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "My mother," he finally said. "She was like you, beautiful, trapped, dying by inches while everyone around her pretended not to notice." His jaw tightened. "By the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, it was too late. She was already gone." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be angry." He looked at her then, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Be furious. Because anger is useful. Anger keeps you alive when hope runs out. Elara set down her glass with trembling hands. What happens tomorrow? When the gossip spreads, and my father demands I come home? Tomorrow, you rest, you heal, and then we figure out our next move. Our? Darian's smile was dangerous. You didn't think I was going to let you face him alone, did you? Before Elara could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. A housekeeper appeared with fresh clothes and toiletries. The guest room is prepared, miss, she said kindly. Whenever you're ready. Elara stood carefully, every movement a reminder of her battered body. Darian rose with her. Thank you, she said quietly, for tonight, for all of it. Don't thank me yet. He walked her to the door. We're just getting started. Alone in the guest room, Elara caught sight of herself in the mirror. Without the makeup and diamonds and carefully styled hair, she looked like what she was, a 23-year-old woman who'd been systematically broken down over decades. But there was something else there too, something new. A spark. Small and fragile, easily extinguished, but present. She thought about Darian's words. Be angry, be furious. For 23 years, she'd swallowed her rage, buried it deep where it couldn't hurt anyone. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe she'd been directing it at the wrong target. Her phone buzzed, a text from her father. You've embarrassed me enough for one evening. You'll return home first thing in the morning, and we'll discuss your behavior. Elara stared at the message for a long time. Then, for the first time in her life, she didn't respond. She turned off her phone, climbed into bed, and closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. Morning came with sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, and the disorienting realization that Elara had slept for 11 hours straight. She lay still for several minutes, cataloging the pain, ribs still aching but less sharp, bruises throbbing but manageable. The absence of fear was almost stranger than the physical relief. A knock interrupted her assessment. Miss Vance? A woman's voice, warm and professional. I've brought breakfast. May I come in? Elara sat up carefully. Yes. The housekeeper from last night entered with a tray. Fresh fruit, toast, coffee that smelled like heaven. She set it on the bedside table with a kind smile. Mr. Wolf asked me to tell you there's no rush. Take your time. Rest as much as you need. She paused at the door. He's in his study when you're ready. 3rd floor, east wing. After she left, Elara reached for her phone. 17 missed calls from her father. 32 text messages, escalating from concern to angry to threatening. You will call me immediately. This behavior is unacceptable. If you're not home by noon, there will be consequences. I know where you are, Elara. Don't test me. Her hands shook as she set the phone down. She should call him, should apologize and beg forgiveness and return before he made good on those threats. That's what the old Elara would have done. But something had shifted during the night. Some fragile thing inside her had cracked open, and she couldn't quite force it closed again. She ate slowly, then showered and dressed in clothes someone had left for her. Simple, but well made, fitting surprisingly well. When she finally made her way to the study, she found Darian at a massive desk covered in papers, a laptop open in front of him. He looked up as she entered. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a car. Elara settled into the chair across from him. But better than yesterday. Dr. Morrison will be back this afternoon to check your ribs. Darian closed his laptop. In the meantime, we need to talk about what happens next. My father wants me home by noon. I assume you're not going. It wasn't a question, but Elara answered anyway. I don't know what I'm doing. Darian leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark, assessing eyes. Your father called here this morning, twice, very concerned about his daughter's well-being, of course. Wanted to send a car to collect you. What did you tell him? That you were resting under doctor's orders and would contact him when you were ready. He smiled slightly. He didn't like that answer. He's going to destroy you for this. Let him try. Elara shook her head. You don't understand. Victor Vance doesn't just ruin people financially. He dismantles them piece by piece. Business deals fall through. Reputations get shredded. People who cross him tend to lose everything. Then it's a good thing I have nothing left to lose. Everyone has something to lose. Darian's expression went distant. My family lost everything that mattered years ago. Money, property, social standing, that's just window dressing. Your father can try to take it, but he can't touch what's already gone. Before Elara could respond, Darian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and swore softly. What? He turned the screen toward her. A society blog, already updated with photos from last night's gala. The headline read, Vance heiress collapses at Ashmont Ball, rescued by Wolf family's black sheep. Elara's stomach dropped as she scanned the article. Speculation about her health, questions about her relationship with Darian, thinly veiled insinuations about scandal and impropriety. The comment section was even worse. Poor girl probably fainted from embarrassment at being associated with that family. The Wolfs have always been trouble. Victor Vance should keep his daughter away from them. I heard she's been ill for months. Maybe that's why she hasn't secured an engagement yet. It started, Elara whispered. This is nothing. Darian took his phone back. By tomorrow, there will be worse. Your father's probably already making calls, spreading whatever narrative serves him best. He'll say I'm unstable, that I've had some kind of breakdown. Elara's hands clenched in her lap. He's done it before, when I tried to tell someone. Made me look crazy while he played the concerned father. Then we changed the narrative. How? Darian stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. Public opinion is a weapon, Elara. Your father's been using it against you for years. Time to turn it around. You want me to expose him? Go public with... She couldn't even finish the sentence. The thought of telling strangers what Victor Vance had done, what he continued to do, made her want to vomit. Not yet. That's the nuclear option, and we save it for when we need it. Darian turned back to her. Right now we focus on weakening his control, making it harder for him to dictate your life without looking like a tyrant. And how do we do that? By making you unavailable, untouchable. His eyes glinted with something dangerous. You stay here, under my protection. Let society gossip and speculate. Let your father rage and threaten. Meanwhile, we gather evidence, build our case, and wait for him to make a mistake. Elara stood, her ribs protesting the sudden movement. You're asking me to declare war on the most powerful man I know using nothing but rumors and defiance. I'm asking you to survive. Everything else is just strategy. He'll come for me. He won't just let this go. I'm counting on it. The certainty in Darian's voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it terrified her, because he was right. Victor Vance wouldn't accept this quietly. He'd retaliate, and when he did, people would get hurt. I should leave, Elara said quietly, before this gets worse. Before I what? Get dragged into your mess? Darian crossed the room until he was standing directly in front of her. Elara, I dragged myself into this the moment I caught you last night. I knew exactly what I was doing. But why? You barely know me. I know enough. His jaw tightened. I know your father sent you to that gala with broken ribs and expected you to smile through it. I know he's been using you as a bargaining chip in his social climbing schemes. And I know that if I don't help you, no one else will. The words hit harder than Elara expected, because he was right. In 23 years, not one person had looked closely enough to see past her perfect facade. Or maybe they'd seen and simply chose to look away. What if I'm not worth it? She whispered. What if I'm too broken to fix? Darian's expression softened just slightly. Then we'll be broken together. At least you won't be alone. Before Elara could respond, the study door burst open. A woman strode in, early 50s, elegant in a way that suggested old money and older grudges. She stopped short when she saw Elara, her eyes widening. Darian, what the hell is going on? I've had 12 calls this morning about... She broke off, staring at Elara. Oh, so the rumors are true. Mother, this is Elara Vance. Elara, my mother, Vivian Wolf. Vivian's gaze swept over Elara with the precision of a jeweler assessing a stone. Victor Vance's daughter, the one who supposedly collapsed at the Ashmont Ball. Not supposedly, Darian said coolly. She actually collapsed, because her father broke her ribs. The bluntness of it made Elara flinch, but Vivian's expression didn't change. She simply nodded slowly. I see. And you brought her here because she needed help. Help! Vivian's laugh was sharp. Darling, you've just painted a target on this family's back. Victor Vance doesn't forgive challenges to his authority. Good. Maybe it's time someone challenged him. Mother and son stared at each other, and Elara felt the weight of old arguments and unresolved tension pressing down on the room. Finally, Vivian sighed. You're just like your father, stubborn and reckless, and convinced you can fix things that are better left alone. She turned to Elara. No offense, dear, but you're about to make all our lives significantly more complicated. I know, Elara said quietly. And I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just be worth it. Vivian moved toward the door, then paused. Darian, a word, alone. They stepped into the hallway, but their voices carried. This is insane, even for you, Vivian hissed. Victor Vance will come after us with everything he has. Let him. You're risking the company, our reputation, everything we've rebuilt, for someone who needs it. Yes, Darian's voice was firm. And if you can't support that, then maybe we never rebuilt the right things. Silence. Then Vivian's voice, softer. She reminds me of Catherine. I know. Your sister wouldn't want you destroying yourself trying to save everyone else. Catherine's dead because no one saved her when it mattered. The pain in Darian's voice was raw. So forgive me if I'm not willing to make that mistake twice. When they returned, Vivian's expression was carefully neutral. Well, since you're apparently staying, Miss Vance, we should discuss logistics. You'll need clothes, toiletries, anything else you left at your father's house. I can go. Absolutely not. Vivian's tone brooked no argument. I'll send someone to collect your things. You give them a list, they retrieve what you need. Under no circumstances do you go back there yourself. Elara wanted to argue, but the thought of facing her father right now made her knees weak. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. Vivian glanced at her son. I'm doing it because apparently Darian's decided to make you his problem, which makes you mine by extension. After Vivian left, Elara sank back into the chair. Your family is intense. You have no idea. Darian returned to his desk. But she's right about one thing. We need to be strategic. Your father's going to push back hard, and we need to be ready. The afternoon passed in a blur of planning. Darian made calls while Elara drafted a list of belongings, her hands shaking as she wrote down addresses and access codes. Dr. Morrison returned, examined her ribs, and prescribed rest and medication. A lawyer arrived, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, who asked questions Elara didn't want to answer but forced herself to anyway. How long has the abuse been occurring? Since I was a child. Physical violence? Yes. Verbal, emotional, financial? All of it. Patricia's pen moved across her notepad. Have you ever reported it? To police? Social services? Anyone? Once. When I was 16. Elara's throat tightened. My father convinced them I was having a mental health crisis, that I was making up stories for attention. They left, and that night She couldn't finish. I understand. Patricia set down her pen. Miss Vance, what I'm about to tell you is difficult to hear, but you need to understand the reality. Even with testimony, even with medical evidence, cases like this are hard to prove. Men like your father are experts at maintaining appearances. They have resources, connections, and the ability to manipulate narratives. So there's nothing I can do. I didn't say that. But if you want to truly be free of him, you need to be smart, methodical. We build a case piece by piece, financial records, medical documentation, witness testimony. We find every crack in his perfect facade and we exploit it. How long will that take? Months? Maybe years? Elara's heart sank. I can't hide here for years. You won't be hiding, Darian interjected. You'll be living your life, just under different terms than your father dictated. Patricia nodded. In the meantime, we establish boundaries. No contact with your father unless supervised. All communication goes through legal channels. You make it clear you're no longer under his control. He'll never accept that. He doesn't have to accept it. He just has to follow the law. After Patricia left, Elara found herself alone in the guest room, staring at her phone. The messages from her father had stopped hours ago, replaced by eerie silence. Somehow, that was worse than the threats. A knock at the door made her jump. It's me, Darian called. Come in. He entered carrying 2 glasses of wine. Thought you could use this. Elara accepted gratefully. Your lawyer thinks I'm fighting a losing battle. Patricia thinks everyone's fighting a losing battle. It's why she wins so often. She plans for the worst. Darian settled into the chair by the window. But she's right about being methodical. Your father's power comes from perception. We need to change how people see him. And how do we do that? By making him react publicly. Men like Victor Vance are used to operating in shadows, controlling things quietly. But when they're forced into the light, when they have to defend themselves openly, they make mistakes. Elara took a long sip of wine. You want to provoke him. I want to make him show his true face. Let society see what he really is when he's not playing the devoted father. That's dangerous. So is doing nothing. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything pressing down. Finally, Elara spoke. Your mother mentioned someone named Catherine. Darian's expression went carefully blank. My sister. What happened to her? The same thing that almost happened to you. His voice was flat, emotionless. She was trapped in a bad situation, married young to a man our parents approved of. By the time we realized how bad it was, she was too afraid to leave. And then one night, he stopped, jaw working. They said it was an accident, that she fell down the stairs. But you don't believe that? No, I don't. Darian's hands tightened around his glass. And I've spent 5 years watching her husband continue his perfect life while she's buried and forgotten. So forgive me if I'm not interested in letting another woman get destroyed by a man who thinks he's untouchable. Elara's throat ached. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be alive. He looked at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Catherine didn't get that choice. You still do. Before she could respond, Darian's phone rang. He glanced at it and frowned. It's the main gate. Someone's here. They hurried downstairs to find Vivian in the entrance hall, arms crossed. Through the window, Elara could see a sleek car idling outside the gates. Your father's assistant, Vivian said grimly. Demanding to see you. Says he has an urgent message. Elara's blood went cold. Don't let him in. Wasn't planning to. Vivian nodded to the security guard. Tell him Miss Vance is unavailable and won't be accepting visitors. The guard spoke into his radio. Through the window, Elara watched the assistant, a thin man named Gerald, who'd worked for her father for years, exit the car and approach the gate. He held up what looked like a letter. He says it's important, the guard reported. Legal documents. I'll handle this. Darian strode outside before anyone could stop him. Elara and Vivian watched through the window as Darian approached the gate. Gerald's mouth moved rapidly, explaining, justifying, demanding. Darian simply held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Gerald passed the envelope through the bars. Darian returned with the envelope unopened. He said your father demands a response by tomorrow morning. Elara's hands shook as she took it. Inside was a single sheet of expensive letterhead. Elara, your recent behavior has forced me to take actions I'd hoped to avoid. I've contacted Dr. Whitmore regarding your obvious mental health crisis. He's agreed that immediate psychiatric evaluation is necessary for your safety and well-being. I've arranged for a private facility where you can receive appropriate care. If you return home voluntarily by tomorrow morning, we can handle this quietly. If you refuse, I'll have no choice but to pursue legal commitment proceedings. I have multiple witnesses who can attest to your instability, your collapse at the Ashmont Ball being just the latest incident. I'm doing this because I love you and want what's best for you. Please don't force me to involve the courts. Father? The letter fell from Elara's numb fingers. That bastard, Vivian breathed. He's threatening to have you institutionalized. Can he do that? Elara whispered. Darian picked up the letter, his expression darkening as he read. Not legally, not without a court order and proper evaluation. But he can try, and the process alone would be humiliating, devastating, exactly what he wants. Elara felt the walls closing in. He'll parade doctors and witnesses who will say, I'm unstable. The collapse, staying here, everything, he'll twist it all to make me look crazy. Then we get ahead of it. Darian pulled out his phone. Patricia needs to see this immediately. It won't matter. Elara's voice came out hollow. You don't understand. He's been building this narrative for years. Every time I tried to speak up, every time I pushed back, he documented it as evidence of my episodes. He has doctors who'll testify, friends who'll swear I've always been fragile, unstable. So we fight back with the truth. The truth? Elara laughed bitterly. The truth is I'm a 23-year-old woman with no money, no education that matters, and a documented history of mental instability going back to childhood. He's a pillar of society with unlimited resources and a reputation for being a devoted father. Who do you think people will believe? Vivienne stepped forward. They'll believe you if we make them listen. How? By giving them a reason to question everything they think they know about Victor Vance. Vivienne's eyes glinted. Your father's banking on you being too scared to fight back. So don't hide. Don't run. Step into the light and force him to defend himself publicly. You want me to go public with the abuse. I want you to control your own narrative before he controls it for you. Elara's mind raced. The thought of exposing her father publicly, of telling strangers about the bruises and broken bones and years of terror, it was almost worse than going back to him. Almost. If I do this, she said slowly, there's no going back. He'll never forgive it. Never. Good, Darian said quietly. Because you don't need his forgiveness. You need your freedom. The next morning, Elara stood in front of a camera while a sympathetic journalist named Sarah Martinez set up her equipment. Patricia sat off to the side, having reviewed every word Elara planned to say. Darian was there too, a silent presence of support. Whenever you're ready, Sarah said gently. Elara took a deep breath, ribs protesting, and looked directly into the camera. My name is Elara Vance, and I need to tell you about my father. The recording took 47 minutes. Elara spoke carefully, measuring each word, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. She told them about the first time her father hit her, age 6, for spilling juice on his business papers. She described the escalation over years, the broken bones disguised as accidents, the isolation from anyone who might ask questions. She showed the camera her bruised ribs, her fading contusions, the medical report Dr. Morrison had documented. When she finished, the room was silent except for Sarah Martinez wiping tears from her eyes. That was incredibly brave, Sarah said quietly. Elara didn't feel brave. She felt exposed, raw, like she'd peeled back her own skin and invited the world to judge what lay beneath. When will it air? Patricia asked. Tonight. Prime time. Sarah began packing her equipment. But Miss Vance, you need to understand, this is going to explode. Once this goes public, there's no taking it back. I know. After Sarah left, Elara sat in the study while Darian and Patricia discussed strategy. Their voices washed over her like white noise. She'd done it. Actually done it. In a few hours, everyone would know. Her father's friends, his business associates, the entire social circle that had watched her grow up. They'd all see her broken and bleeding and desperate. Elara. She looked up to find Darian crouched in front of her chair, his dark eyes searching her face. Are you all right? No. The honesty felt good. But I will be. Your father's going to retaliate fast, probably before the interview even finishes airing. I know. We need to be ready for anything. He paused. There's something else. Something I've been considering, but I wanted to wait until after the interview to bring it up. Patricia cleared her throat. I'll give you two some privacy. After she left, Darian remained crouched in front of Elara, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. What is it? She asked. A way to shift the power dynamic more permanently, to make it significantly harder for your father to come after you legally or socially. He took a breath. We could announce an engagement. Elara's mind went blank. What? A public engagement. Between us. Darian spoke quickly, as if trying to get all the words out before she could interrupt. It would accomplish several things. Give you legal standing separate from your father, provide social legitimacy that makes his claims about your instability harder to believe, and force him to deal with me as well as you. You want to fake an engagement. I want to give you protection. The engagement part is just the mechanism. Elara stared at him. That's insane. Probably, but so is everything else we've done in the last 48 hours. Darian stood pacing to the window. Think about it strategically. Right now, you're a vulnerable woman fleeing her father. That narrative can be spun as mental illness, rebellion, anything your father wants. But if you're engaged to be married, if you're making a calculated choice about your future, that's harder to dismiss as instability. You tie yourself to me publicly just for strategy? I tie myself to you because I believe in what we're doing. The strategy is just a bonus. He turned back to her. I'm not asking you to actually marry me, Elara. I'm asking you to let me stand between you and your father in a way that society will recognize and respect. People will talk. They'll say I'm using you or you're taking advantage. Let them talk. They're already talking. Darian's expression was calm, certain. The question is whether we control the narrative or let your father control it for us. Before Elara could respond, Vivian appeared in the doorway, her phone pressed to her ear and her expression grim. "We have a problem," she said, ending the call. Victor Vance just held a press conference. Darian's laptop was open seconds later, streaming the recording. Victor stood at a podium, looking every inch the concerned father, hair perfectly styled, expression appropriately worried, voice trembling with emotion. "My daughter Elara has been struggling with mental health issues for several years," he said, and Elara felt sick. "As a father, I've tried everything to help her. The best doctors, the most compassionate care, but recently her condition has deteriorated significantly. The collapse at the Ashmont Ball was just the latest in a series of concerning episodes." "That bastard," Vivian muttered. "Ma." Victor continued, his performance flawless. "I'm speaking publicly now because I fear for her safety. She's currently staying with individuals who, while perhaps well-meaning, are not equipped to provide the specialized care she requires. I'm asking anyone who sees my daughter to please contact me immediately. I just want her home, safe, where she belongs." A reporter called out, "Mr. Vance, are the rumors true that your daughter is staying with Darian Wolfe?" Victor's expression tightened just slightly. "I can't confirm where Elara is currently, but I will say that the Wolfe family has a troubled history. If my daughter is with them, I'm deeply concerned about the influences she may be exposed to." "He's framing himself as the victim," Patricia said, appearing behind them. "Smart, preemptive. Now, when your interview airs, people will question whether it's real testimony or the delusions of someone mentally ill." "Can he do this?" Elara's voice came out strangled. "Just lie on television?" "He's not technically lying. He's expressing concern and making implications. Very difficult to sue for." Patricia's jaw tightened. "We need to move up our timeline. The interview should air tonight as planned, but we need additional support. Witnesses, documentation, anything that corroborates your version of events." "I don't have witnesses," he made sure of that. "What about household staff?" Darian asked. "Doctors who treated your injuries over the years? Anyone who might have seen something?" Elara thought back through years of carefully hidden bruises and fabricated stories. "There was a maid, Elena. She worked for us when I was a teenager. She saw, she knew. But my father fired her years ago." "Can you find her?" "Maybe. If she's even still in the city." Patricia was already on her phone. "Give me her full name and any details you remember. I'll have my investigator track her down." The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and strategy sessions. Vivian reached out to old family friends, testing the waters of public opinion. Patricia's team worked on finding Elena and any other potential witnesses. And Darian sat with Elara in the study, going over every detail of her father's press conference. "He's setting up an insanity defense," Darian said grimly. "If we can't prove you're of sound mind, everything you say gets dismissed as delusion. I am of sound mind. I know that, but we need other people to know it too." He paused. "Which brings me back to my earlier suggestion. An engagement would help establish your credibility. Show that you're making rational decisions about your future." Elara looked at him. This man who'd inserted himself into her nightmare without hesitation, who'd offered protection without expecting anything in return. "Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's just about your sister." Darian was quiet for a long moment. "You asked me once what I had left to lose. The truth is I lost most of what mattered when Catherine died. My faith in the system, my trust in people who claimed to help, all of it. But I gained something too, clarity. I saw exactly how easily powerful men destroy vulnerable women while everyone looks the away." He met her gaze. "I can't save my sister, but maybe I can help save you, and maybe that's enough. And if I say yes to this fake engagement, what happens when we're done? When my father's dealt with and I don't need protection anymore? Then we end it, quietly, amicably. You go live your life, and I go live mine." "You make it sound simple." "Nothing about this is simple, but it's effective." Darian leaned forward. Elara, I'm not asking you to love me or even like me particularly. I'm asking you to let me be useful. Let me stand in front of you while you get strong enough to stand on your own. The interview aired at 8 o'clock. Elara watched from the study, flanked by Darian and Vivian as her own face filled the screen. She looked small, she thought. Breakable. But her voice was steady as she described years of abuse in careful, clinical detail. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Hashtag Vance abuse trended on Twitter. Think pieces appeared analyzing her body language, her testimony, her credibility. Some people believed her immediately. Others called it an attention grab, a bitter daughter lashing out at a concerned father. And still others, the worst ones, suggested she deserved whatever she got. Elara's phone rang. An unknown number. Don't answer it, Patricia warned. It rang again and again. Different numbers, all unknown. Reporters, Darian said, checking his own phone. They've got your number somehow. My father probably gave it to them. Vivian's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and swore. The Ashmont Club just released a statement supporting Victor, calling for compassion and understanding during this difficult family matter. Of course they did, Elara said bitterly. Half the board plays golf with him every Sunday. But then other responses started rolling in. A women's advocacy group offered support. 3 different lawyers contacted Patricia offering pro bono assistance. And most surprisingly, Margaret Whitmore, the gossip who'd cornered Elara at the gala, posted a long Twitter thread about seeing the bruise on Elara's jaw and choosing not to ask questions. Public opinion is split, Patricia reported, scrolling through her tablet, but that's actually good. Split means debate, and debate means people are paying attention. At 9:30, Vivian's phone rang with a number she apparently recognized. She answered, listened for a moment, then covered the receiver. It's Elena Reyes, the former maid. My investigator found her. She's willing to talk. Elara's heart leapt. What did she say? Vivian put the phone on speaker. Miss Vance? The voice was older, tired, but Elara recognized it immediately. Elena, thank you for calling. I saw your interview. I had to reach out. Elena's voice cracked. I should have done something years ago, should have reported what I saw, but I was scared and I needed the job and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's okay. You're helping now. Elara gripped the edge of the desk. Will you testify? Tell people what you witnessed? Yes, whatever you need. Elena took a shaky breath. I saw him hit you multiple times. I saw the bruises, the broken wrist you tried to hide, and I saw him threaten you when you wanted to tell your school counselor. I heard everything. Patricia leaned toward the phone. Ms. Reyes, this is Patricia Chen, Miss Vance's attorney. Would you be willing to give a formal statement on record? Yes, anything to help. After the call ended, Patricia looked almost triumphant. This changes things. Credible witness testimony from someone with no apparent motive to lie that seriously undermines your father's narrative. He'll attack her credibility, Elara warned. He'll say she's a disgruntled former employee or that I paid her off or let him try. The more he attacks, the more defensive he looks. Patricia gathered her things. I'm going to meet with Elena tonight, get her full statement documented. In the meantime, you should rest. Tomorrow's going to be intense, but sleep was impossible. Elara lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling while her phone buzzed endlessly with notifications. The interview had been shared thousands of times. Her father's press conference was being dissected and analyzed, and somewhere out there, Victor Vance was planning his next move. The thought terrified her. At midnight, there was a soft knock on her door. It's me, Darian called. Come in. He entered carrying 2 mugs. Hot chocolate. Vivian's secret recipe. Supposed to cure insomnia and anxiety. Does it work? Absolutely not. But it tastes good. Elara accepted the mug gratefully. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the distant ticking of a hallway clock. I've been thinking about your proposal, she finally said. The engagement. Darian looked at her, waiting. If we do this, we need rules, clear boundaries. Elara set down her mug. This is business. Strategy. Not romance or some rescue fantasy. You're helping me get free of my father, and in return, she paused, thinking. What do you get out of this? The satisfaction of pissing off Victor Vance, like, I'm serious. So am I. But Darian's expression softened. Elara, I don't need anything from you. This isn't a transaction. Everything's a transaction. I learned that from my father. Her voice hardened. So tell me what you really want. Darian studied her for a long moment. Redemption, maybe? A chance to do something right when it matters. He paused. My family's reputation has been in the gutter for years. If helping you somehow rehabilitates that, great. If not, at least I'll know I tried. It wasn't romantic or particularly comforting, but it was honest, which Elara appreciated more than pretty lies. Okay, she said, let's do it. Let's announce an engagement. Are you sure? No, but I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. Elara met his gaze. You said I should be angry, be furious. Well, I am, and I'm done running. Darian's smile was sharp. Then let's give your father something to really worry about. They announced the engagement the next morning with a carefully worded statement released to major news outlets. The response was immediate and explosive. Vance heiress engaged to Wolf heir amid abuse allegations, screamed the headlines. Society columnists went into overdrive analyzing what this meant. Victor Vance's allies called it a publicity stunt. Elara's supporters saw it as a woman taking control of her narrative. Victor himself remained silent for exactly 4 hours. Then he requested a private meeting. Absolutely not, Vivian said immediately when the message came through. It's obviously a trap. Maybe, Elara said, or maybe he's actually worried. He's never worried. He's strategic. Vivian paced the study. He wants to get you alone, intimidate you, convince you to recant everything. Then we don't let him get her alone, Darian said. We agree to meet, but on our terms. Public location, witnesses, Patricia present. Patricia shook her head. I advise against this entirely. Nothing good comes from engaging directly. But Elara felt something shifting inside her, that spark Darian had mentioned, growing into something brighter, more dangerous. I want to meet him. Elara, I want to look him in the eye and show him I'm not afraid anymore. Her hands clenched into fists. He's spent my entire life making me cower. Maybe it's time I make him face what he's done. Darian studied her carefully. If we do this, we control everything. Location, timing, who's present. He doesn't get to dictate terms anymore. Agreed. They chose a hotel conference room, neutral territory, with security and witnesses nearby. The meeting was set for 3 o'clock the following afternoon. Elara spent the intervening time rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd stand, the exact expression she'd wear. She refused to look weak, refused to give her father the satisfaction of seeing her break. When the time came, she dressed carefully in clothes Vivian had purchased, a tailored suit that made her look older, more authoritative. Her ribs still ached, but she'd refused pain medication. She wanted to be sharp, clear-headed. Darian and Patricia flanked her as they entered the hotel. Victor was already there, seated at the conference table, looking exactly as she remembered. Distinguished, controlled, every inch the concerned father, except his eyes. Those were cold and calculating as ever. Elara. He stood, moving toward her with arms extended as if for an embrace. Don't. The word came out harder than she'd intended. Victor stopped, his expression flickering briefly before settling back into paternal concern. Sweetheart, I've been worried sick. Save it. Elara moved to the opposite side of the table, maintaining distance. We're not here for a reunion. You wanted to talk, so talk. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He glanced at Darian and Patricia. I'd prefer to speak with my daughter privately. That's not happening, Darian said flatly. This is a family matter. I'm her fiancé. That makes it my business too. The word fiancé landed like a grenade. Victor's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly beneath. But he recovered quickly, settling back into his chair. This engagement, he said carefully. It's rather sudden, isn't it? Not really, Elara lied smoothly. Darian and I have been growing close for months. We simply kept it private. How convenient. And this sudden announcement coming right after your very public accusations? You don't think that looks suspicious? The only thing suspicious here is you threatening to have me institutionalized for telling the truth. Victor's expression hardened. That letter was an attempt to help you. You've clearly been under significant stress. You broke my ribs. Elara's voice was steady, cold. You've been breaking me piece by piece for 23 years. And now that I finally found the courage to speak up, you want to gaslight me into thinking I'm crazy? You are my daughter. Everything I've done has been for your own good. Stop lying. The words came out fierce, louder than she'd intended. Just for once, stop pretending you're some devoted father. We both know what you are. Silence filled the room. Victor stared at her, and Elara saw the exact moment he realized his usual tactics wouldn't work, that she wasn't the terrified girl he could manipulate with a look. You have no idea what you've done, he said quietly, all pretense of affection gone. The damage you've caused. To your reputation, to our family name, to everything I've built. Good. I hope I destroy every piece of it. Victor's hands flattened on the table. You think you're safe because you're hiding behind the Wolf name? Because some lawyer told you you're untouchable? He leaned forward. I've destroyed better families than the Wolf's. I can make Darian's business interests evaporate overnight. I can make sure Vivian never shows her face in polite society again. And I can absolutely make you wish you'd never opened your mouth. Is that a threat, Mr. Vance? Patricia asked coolly. Because we're recording this conversation. Victor's eyes flickered to the small device on the table. His expression smoothed over instantly. Of course not. I'm simply trying to make my daughter understand the consequences of her choices. The only consequences I care about are yours, Elara said. Elena Reyes gave a full statement. Medical records are being subpoenaed. And every day more people are coming forward with stories about your true character. She stood, feeling stronger than she had in years. You wanted me compliant and controlled. You wanted me to be your perfect little puppet. Well, I'm done performing. You'll regret this. Victor's voice was ice. When the money runs out, when your new friends abandon you, when reality sets in, you'll come crawling back. And I won't be there. Promise? The word hung in the air like a challenge. Victor stood slowly, his expression unreadable. This conversation is over. But Elara, understand something. I've spent 23 years building you into something valuable. I'm not about to let you waste that investment. He left without another word, the door closing with a quiet click that felt more ominous than a slam. Elara's legs gave out the moment he was gone. She collapsed into the chair, shaking. You did well, Patricia said quietly. Very well. And we got him on record making threats. It won't matter. Elara's voice was hollow. You heard him. He's going to destroy everyone around me until I have nothing left. Let him try, Darian said, crouching beside her chair. He's one man, Elara, powerful, yes. Connected, absolutely, but not invincible. You don't know him like I do. Maybe not, but I know men like him, and they all make the same mistake. They assume power and control are the same thing. He took her hand. Your father can't control you anymore. And that terrifies him. Over the next week, Victor made good on his threats. 3 of Darian's major business deals mysteriously fell through. Vivian received notices that her membership to 2 exclusive clubs was under review. The Vance family lawyer filed preliminary paperwork challenging Elara's mental competency. But for every attack Victor launched, they had a countermove. Patricia filed restraining orders. Elena's testimony was notarized and distributed to media outlets. More witnesses came forward, a former teacher who'd suspected abuse, a family friend who'd seen too much. The court of public opinion remained divided, but the tide was shifting, slowly, painfully, but shifting nonetheless. Then came the masked ball. The Thornbury annual masquerade was the event of the season. Exclusive, elegant, and impossible to avoid if you wanted to maintain any social standing. Invitations had gone out months ago, long before Elara's world had imploded. We should go, Vivian said one evening. Show that we're not hiding. That's insane, Elara protested. My father will be there. Exactly. Which is why we go. We show up, heads high, and we prove you're not the broken girl he's been painting you as. Vivian's expression was fierce. Hiding makes you look guilty. Attending makes you look strong. Elara looked at Darian. What do you think? I think your father spent weeks controlling the narrative. Maybe it's time we take some of that control back. The night of the masquerade, Elara stood in front of the mirror while Vivian's stylist worked magic. The gown was midnight blue, almost black, with delicate silver embroidery that caught the light. The mask matched, hiding half her face but leaving her eyes visible. She looked powerful, dangerous even, Nothing like the scared girl who'd collapsed at the Ashmont ball. Ready? Darian appeared in the doorway, devastating in his tuxedo and black mask. Elara took a deep breath. As I'll ever be. The Thornberry estate was spectacular, all glowing lanterns and masked figures dancing beneath starlit gardens. Elara felt every eye turned toward them as they entered, felt the whispers following their movement across the ballroom. And there, near the center of the room, stood Victor Vance. He wore a silver mask that matched his distinguished hair, and he was surrounded by his usual circle of sycophants and business associates. But when he saw Elara, everything else seemed to fall away. Father and daughter stared at each other across the crowded ballroom. "We don't have to do this," Darian murmured beside her. But Elara was done running, done hiding. She'd given her testimony, announced her engagement, stood up in every way she knew how. This was just one more step. She walked straight toward her father. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing drama. Victor's associates fell silent, watching. By the time Elara reached him, half the ballroom had turned to watch. "Father," she said coolly. "Elara." His voice was pleasant, but his eyes behind the mask were glacial. "How lovely to see you looking so well. Your engagement obviously agrees with you." "It does. Finally making my own choices tends to have that effect. Your own choices." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Is that what you call it? I'd call it being manipulated by people with their own agendas." "Funny, that's exactly what I'd call the last 23 years of my life." Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. This wasn't how society confrontations worked. Polite, coded, carefully managed. This was raw and real and very public. Victor's expression hardened. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No, I'm done with private. Done with hiding your abuse behind closed doors while you play the devoted father in public." Elara's voice carried across the silent ballroom. "You wanted to control the narrative about my mental state? Fine. Here I am. Look at me. Do I seem unstable? Or do I seem like someone who finally found the courage to stop protecting her abuser?" "Elara, you're making a scene. Good. Because maybe it's time everyone saw exactly who Victor Vance really is." Victor's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. The same grip that had left marks hundreds of times before. But this time, Elara didn't flinch. "Let go!" Her voice was steel. For a moment, Victor held on, his eyes promising consequences. Then Darian stepped forward, and something in his expression made Victor's hand drop. "I think it's time you left," Darian said quietly, but every word carried threat. Victor looked around at the watching crowd, at the phones now recording, at the witnesses he couldn't intimidate or silence. He'd lost control of the situation entirely, and they all knew it. "This isn't over," he said, low enough that only Elara and Darian could hear. "Yes," Elara said. "It is." Victor turned and walked away, his entourage trailing uncertainly after him. The ballroom remained frozen for several heartbeats. Then someone began to clap. It was Margaret Whitmore, of all people, her applause slow and deliberate. Others joined, some enthusiastically, some hesitantly, but the sound grew until it filled the space. Elara felt tears burning behind her mask, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not now." "Let's get some air," Darian murmured. They escaped to the gardens, leaving the chaos behind. Elara's hands were shaking violently now, the adrenaline crash hitting hard. "That was," she started, "incredible. Terrifying. Probably reckless." Darian pulled her close, and Elara let herself lean into him. "But you did it. You faced him and didn't back down. He's going to make me pay for that." "Probably, but Elara." Darian pulled back just enough to look at her. "You just showed an entire room of influential people exactly who he is. The concerned father routine, shattered. His reputation as this pillar of society, cracked. You did that." Elara's phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "Video already going viral. Vance grabbing your wrist in front of witnesses is the evidence we needed. This changes everything." "It's working," Elara whispered. "The plan is actually working." "Of course it is. You're stronger than you think." They stood in the garden for a long moment, the sounds of the masquerade drifting through the night air. Elara felt different somehow, lighter, even with the fear still coiling in her chest. Then Darian's phone rang. He answered, his expression darkening as he listened. "When?" he asked sharply. "How bad?" He ended the call, his jaw tight. "What happened?" "Your father just filed an emergency petition with the court. He's claiming you're an immediate danger to yourself and others." Darian's eyes were grim. "He's requesting immediate psychiatric commitment. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning." Elara's breath stopped. This was it. Victor's nuclear option, the thing she'd feared most. "He's going to have me locked up." "Not if we can help it." Darian was already texting Patricia. "But we need to move fast. He's got witnesses lined up, doctors prepared to testify. This is his endgame." They rushed back inside to find Vivian already waiting, her expression fierce. "I heard. We fight this with everything we have." But as they drove back to the estate to prepare, Elara couldn't shake the cold fear settling in her bones. Tomorrow, her father would try to strip away her freedom entirely. And if he succeeded, everything they'd fought for, every brave stand, every public confrontation, would be for nothing. She'd be locked away, labeled insane, and Victor Vance would maintain his perfect reputation while she rotted in some psychiatric facility where no one could hear her scream. The car pulled up to the estate, and Elara saw additional security posted at the gates. Darian had anticipated her father might try something desperate. But as they walked toward the house, Elara's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it. A single photo. Her childhood bedroom, taken from inside the house. And beneath it, 3 words that made her blood run cold. "I'm coming home." Elara stared at the photo, her bedroom from an angle that could only have been taken from inside her father's house. The message beneath it pulsed with menace. "Show me." Darian's voice was tight. She held out the phone. His expression went dark. "He's trying to intimidate you, make you think he can reach you anywhere." "It's working." Elara's voice shook despite her best efforts. "He's in my room, going through my things. He's desperate," Vivian interrupted, appearing beside them. "Which makes him dangerous, but also sloppy. People make mistakes when they're desperate." Patricia was already on her phone, barking instructions to someone. She ended the call and turned to Elara. "We're filing for an emergency protective order tonight. That photo constitutes harassment, and the implied threat won't stop him." Elara sank into the nearest chair, exhaustion and fear crashing over her in waves. "You don't understand. He doesn't care about restraining orders or legal consequences. He cares about control. And right now, I'm out of his control. Then we make sure you stay that way." Darian crouched in front of her. "Tomorrow's hearing. We go in prepared. We bring Elena. We bring your medical records. We bring every piece of evidence that proves you're not only sane, but that your father's the unstable one." "What if it's not enough?" "Then we fight harder." The night passed in fragments, brief moments of sleep interrupted by nightmares of locked doors and white walls. By dawn, Elara was exhausted but wired, adrenaline thrumming through her veins as she dressed for court. The hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Patricia had assembled an impressive team, 3 associate lawyers, Elena Reyes prepared to testify, Dr. Morrison with medical documentation, and even Margaret Whitmore, who'd agreed to speak about witnessing Victor's aggression at the masquerade. "Remember," Patricia said as they approached the courthouse, "stay calm. Answer questions directly. Don't let him provoke you into an emotional response." Easier said than done. The moment Elara entered the courtroom and saw her father sitting with his legal team, expensive suits and confident expressions, her stomach twisted. Victor looked at her with something like disappointment, as if she were a business investment that had failed to perform. Judge Catherine Brennan entered, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for suffering no nonsense. She reviewed the petition quickly, then looked up. "Mr. Vance, you're requesting emergency psychiatric commitment for your daughter based on claims that she's a danger to herself or others. That's an extraordinary request requiring extraordinary evidence." Victor's lead attorney stood, Gerald Ashford, a silver-haired shark Elara recognized from her father's business dealings. "Your Honor, we have substantial documentation showing Miss Vance's deteriorating mental state, multiple incidents of erratic behavior, emotional instability, and concerning ideation." "I'd like to see this documentation." What followed was a parade of Victor's witnesses, a psychiatrist who'd never actually met Elara, but had reviewed her case and determined she showed signs of borderline personality disorder and possible psychotic breaks. a former family friend who testified that Elara had always been fragile and overly emotional. Victor's assistant Gerald, who claimed to have witnessed Elara having violent outbursts at home. It was masterfully constructed, just enough truth twisted into lies to sound believable. Then it was Patricia's turn. Your Honor, I'd like to call Elena Reyes to the stand. Elena walked to the witness box with quiet dignity. She looked older than Elara remembered, but her eyes were steady as she was sworn in. Ms. Reyes, you worked for the Vance household for how long? 7 years, from when Miss Elara was 12 until she was 19. And during that time, what did you witness? Elena's voice was calm, factual. She described finding Elara with bruises, hearing Victor's shouted threats through closed doors, seeing the fear in a teenage girl's eyes. She recounted specific incidents, the broken wrist that Victor claimed was from a fall, the cracked ribs he blamed on sports, the emotional manipulation disguised as discipline. Ashford tried to shake her testimony during cross-examination. Ms. Reyes, isn't it true that you were terminated from your position? Yes. And isn't it also true that you harbored resentment toward Mr. Vance because of that termination? No, I harbored guilt because I didn't do more to help his daughter. The distinction landed hard. Ashford shifted tactics. How can we trust your memory of events from years ago? Because some things you don't forget, like the sound of a 13-year-old girl crying in the bathroom after her father dislocated her shoulder. Elena looked directly at Victor, or the way he'd smile at guests during parties while that same girl stood silent with fresh bruises under her dress. Next came Dr. Morrison, whose recent examination provided stark contrast to the psychiatrist's speculative diagnosis. He presented X-rays showing old fractures consistent with repeated trauma, documented bruising in various stages of healing, medical evidence that told a story Victor couldn't refute. Then Margaret Whitmore took the stand, describing the masquerade in detail. Victor's aggressive grab of Elara's wrist, the visible marks it left, the threatening tone he'd used in front of witnesses. And in your professional opinion, as someone who's observed high society for 3 decades, Patricia asked, did Miss Vance appear mentally unstable during your interaction? Quite the opposite. She appeared remarkably composed, considering she was confronting her abuser in front of hundreds of people. Margaret's voice was firm. If anything, I'd say her father appeared unhinged. The mask slipped, so to speak. Finally, Patricia called Elara herself. Walking to the stand felt like moving through water. Every eye in the courtroom tracked her movement. She could feel her father's gaze like ice against her spine. Patricia's questions were straightforward, giving Elara space to tell her story in her own words. She spoke carefully, measuring each sentence, fighting to keep her voice steady as she described years of systematic abuse. And why didn't you report this earlier? Patricia asked gently. Because I tried. When I was 16, I told a school counselor. She called my father in for a meeting. He convinced her I was having adolescent rebellion issues, that I was making up stories because I was angry about not being allowed to date. Elara's hands clenched in her lap. That night, he made it very clear what would happen if I ever tried to tell anyone again. What did he say? That no one would believe me, that he had the money and connections to make me disappear into whatever institution he chose, that I was nothing without him. Her voice cracked slightly. And he was right. I had nothing. No money, no independence, no one who'd protect me over him. Until now. Until now. Ashford's cross-examination was brutal. He hammered at inconsistencies in her timeline, questioned why she'd waited so long to speak up, suggested the engagement to Darian was a calculated move to gain sympathy and financial security. Isn't it convenient, he said, pacing in front of the witness box, that you suddenly remember all this abuse right when you're facing consequences for your erratic behavior? I didn't suddenly remember anything. I've lived with it every day for 23 years. Yet you stayed. You attended social functions with your father, smiled for cameras, played the devoted daughter. If the abuse was so terrible, why not leave? Elara looked directly at her father for the first time since taking the stand. Because he made sure I couldn't. He controlled my money, my education, my entire life, and he made it very clear that leaving meant losing everything, including my safety. Your safety? Are you claiming your father would have physically harmed you if you'd left? He already was physically harming me. Leaving would have just meant fewer witnesses, Judge Brennan interrupted. Mr. Ashford, Unless you have questions that actually pertain to Miss Vance's current mental state, I suggest you move on. The hearing lasted 4 hours. By the end, Elara felt wrung out, hollowed. But when Judge Brennan called for closing arguments, she forced herself to sit straight, to look composed. Ashford argued passionately for commitment, painting Elara as a troubled young woman in need of professional help, insisting her allegations were the product of delusion rather than reality. Patricia countered with cold facts. Your Honor, the petitioner has failed to provide any credible evidence that Miss Vance is currently a danger to herself or others. What we've seen instead is a pattern of abuse documented by medical professionals, corroborated by witnesses, and evident in Miss Vance's own injuries. Mr. Vance isn't seeking treatment for his daughter. He's seeking control over a woman who's finally found the courage to escape him. Judge Brennan was silent for a long moment, reviewing her notes. I've seen many of these petitions, she finally said, and I've learned to distinguish between genuine concern and manipulation dressed up as care. She looked at Victor. Mr. Vance, your petition is denied. I find no credible evidence that your daughter poses a danger requiring immediate commitment. Relief crashed over Elara so hard she nearly sobbed. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, I'm granting Miss Vance's request for a protective order. You are to have no contact with your daughter except through legal counsel. You are not to approach her, call her, or communicate with her in any way. Violation will result in immediate arrest. She paused. And Mr. Vance, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into the abuse allegations. If even half of what I've heard today is true, you have a great deal to answer for. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for the doors. Victor's expression remained perfectly calm, but Elara saw the muscle twitching in his jaw, the tell that meant he was furious. Patricia was already ushering Elara toward the side exit. Don't stop, don't look back. We need to get you out of here before the press descends. But as they reached the hallway, Elara heard her father's voice cutting through the chaos. This isn't over, Elara. She turned despite Patricia's warning. Victor stood in the courtroom doorway, surrounded by his legal team, but somehow alone. For the first time in her life, he looked diminished. Yes, it is, she said clearly. You don't own me anymore. The ride back to the estate was quiet. Elara stared out the window, processing what had just happened. She'd won. Actually won. The court had believed her over her father, had granted protection, had taken her seriously. How do you feel? Darian asked quietly. I don't know. Relieved. Terrified. Like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. She turned to him. He's not going to accept this. The protective order, the investigation, he'll find a way around it. Maybe. But his power's been significantly weakened. The court sided with you publicly. That's going to make it much harder for him to maintain his reputation. Over the next week, they watched that prediction come true. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation. 3 more former employees came forward with their own stories of Victor's cruelty. Business partners began quietly distancing themselves. The Ashmont Club, which had initially supported Victor, released a carefully worded statement about taking abuse allegations seriously. Victor's empire wasn't crumbling overnight, but cracks were definitely forming. Then came the breakthrough they hadn't expected. Patricia arrived at the estate one afternoon with an expression Elara had never seen before, something almost like triumph. We found something, she said, spreading papers across Darian's desk. My investigators have been digging into Victor's business dealings, looking for leverage. And they discovered some very interesting financial irregularities. What kind of irregularities? Vivian asked. The kind that involve offshore accounts, falsified tax documents, and money laundering through shell corporations. Patricia's smile was sharp. Your father's been running a very sophisticated scheme for at least a decade, and we have documentation. Elara's breath caught. You're saying he's been committing crimes? Multiple federal crimes, yes. We've already turned the information over to the FBI. They're very interested. This could destroy him, Darian said slowly. It will destroy him. Once the federal investigation goes public, his reputation will be finished. Business partners will flee, investors will pull out, and his social standing will evaporate. Patricia looked at Elara. This is the leverage we needed. Not just to protect you, but to ensure he can't hurt anyone else. The news broke 3 days later. FBI investigates prominent businessman for fraud and tax evasion. Victor's face was plastered across every news outlet, but this time the narrative was entirely different. No more concerned father protecting his mentally ill daughter. Now he was the villain, a corrupt businessman who'd built his empire on lies. The response was immediate and brutal. The Ashmont Club revoked his membership. Business associates released statements condemning his actions. Former friends suddenly couldn't remember knowing him well. Victor Vance, pillar of society, was being systematically dismantled. Elara watched it happen from the safety of the Wolf estate, feeling something she'd never expected. Not triumph, but a strange, hollow sadness. This was the man who'd raised her, however badly, and watching him fall felt less like victory and more like witnessing the death of something that had never been real to begin with. "Are you okay?" Darian found her in the garden one evening, staring at her phone where new headlines kept appearing. "I don't know what I am." She set the phone down. "Part of me is relieved. Part of me is angry that it took fraud charges to make people listen when abuse allegations weren't enough. And part of me just feels empty. That's normal. Grief for what could have been, maybe." Darian settled onto the bench beside her. "He was still your father, even if he was a terrible one. Do you think he'll go to prison?" "If the FBI's case is as strong as Patricia thinks, yes. Federal charges with that much documentation. He's looking at serious time." The thought should have brought satisfaction. Instead, Elara just felt tired. 2 weeks later, Patricia called with an update. "Victor's legal team has approached us about a deal." "What kind of deal?" "He wants to avoid trial. He's willing to plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for cooperation with federal investigators." Patricia paused. "Part of the deal includes a permanent restraining order and a substantial financial settlement for you." "He's buying his way out." "Essentially, yes. He'll still face prison time, but less than if he went to trial. And you'll get financial independence, enough to never worry about money again." Elara looked at Darian, who sat across from her in the study. "What do you think?" "I think it's your decision. If you want to push for a full trial, watch him face every consequence, we'll support that. If you want to accept the deal and be done with him, that's valid too." She thought about it for a long time. A trial would be public, messy, potentially devastating for everyone involved. It would keep her tied to her father for months or even years, but accepting the deal felt like letting him off easy. "What does the restraining order include?" she finally asked. "No contact whatsoever. He can't approach you, call you, or communicate through third parties. If he violates it, he goes straight to prison regardless of the plea deal." "And the settlement?" $10 million transferred to an account in your name alone, plus a formal written apology acknowledging the abuse. Elara laughed bitterly. "He's willing to buy my silence with money and a piece of paper." "It's not silence. The abuse is already public record. This is compensation." Patricia's voice was gentle. "But Elara, whatever you decide, make sure it's what you need, not what you think you should do or what would hurt him most. What would actually help you move forward?" That night, Elara stood in front of the mirror in her guest room, the room that had become more home than her father's house ever was. She looked different now, thinner still, but stronger somehow. The bruises had faded, the ribs had healed, but the real change was in her eyes. She didn't look like prey anymore. "I'm accepting the deal," she told Patricia the next morning. "With one condition, the apology has to be specific. I want him to acknowledge exactly what he did. No vague language about mistakes or difficult circumstances. I want the truth in writing." Patricia smiled. "I'll make it happen." The final agreement took another week to negotiate. Victor's lawyers fought over every word of the apology, but Patricia held firm. In the end, they got what Elara demanded: a detailed acknowledgement of physical abuse, emotional manipulation, and systematic control spanning 2 decades. The document arrived by courier. Elara stared at her father's signature for a long time, his distinctive handwriting flowing across the bottom of the page. It wasn't justice, not really, but it was something. That evening, Vivian organized a small dinner to celebrate. Just family and Patricia. They ate in the formal dining room, and for the first time since arriving at the estate, Elara felt almost relaxed. "So what's next for you?" Vivian asked over dessert. "You're financially independent now. You can do anything you want." Elara hadn't let herself think that far ahead, too focused on survival to consider what came after. "I don't know. I've never had choices before." That's terrifying and liberating in equal measure, Vivian said. Trust me, I know the feeling. What did you do? When you finally had choices? Vivian's expression grew distant. I made terrible ones for a while. Then slowly I figured out who I was without someone else defining me. She smiled. It took time. Be patient with yourself. Later, Elara found Darian in his study, reviewing business documents. He looked up as she entered. We should talk about the engagement, she said. Ah. He set down his papers. Right, the arrangement. The deal's done. My father can't touch me legally or financially. I don't need protection anymore. Elara sat across from him. Which means we can end this, the engagement, I mean. It served its purpose. It did. Darian studied her carefully. Is that what you want? To end it? Elara stopped. The honest answer was she didn't know. Over the past weeks, the fake engagement had started to feel less fake. Darian had become more than a shield. He'd become someone she relied on, trusted, maybe even cared about. But that didn't mean she should build a real relationship on top of a convenient lie. I think we should be honest about what this was, she said carefully. A strategy. A way to protect me when I needed it. And I'm grateful for that, genuinely. But building something real on that foundation, it doesn't seem fair to either of us. Fair point. Darian leaned back in his chair. So we end the engagement amicably. Stay friends, hopefully. You go figure out who you are without your father's shadow, and He paused. Well, I go back to whatever I was doing before you collapsed at that gala. Sounds like we have a plan. They announced the end of the engagement 3 days later, a mutual decision, both parties remaining supportive of each other, no drama. Society would gossip, of course, but they'd gossip anyway. At least this way they controlled the narrative. Elara moved into her own apartment, a spacious place with floor-to-ceiling windows and more light than she'd ever known. She furnished it slowly, choosing each piece carefully, learning what she actually liked versus what had been chosen for her. She started therapy. Real therapy with a trauma specialist who didn't work for her father and had no agenda beyond helping Elara heal. And she discovered something unexpected. Anger. Not the hot, explosive rage she'd felt at the masquerade, but something colder, more purposeful. She was angry at the system that had failed her, at the people who'd looked away, at the society that valued reputation over safety. What do you want to do with that anger? Her therapist asked during one session. Elara thought about it. She could let it eat her alive, or she could transform it into something useful. 6 months after the court hearing, she established the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping women escape abusive situations. She used part of her settlement to fund it, recruited Elena as operations director, and brought in Patricia as legal counsel. The response was overwhelming. Within weeks, they had more calls than they could handle. Women desperate for help, for resources, for someone who'd believe them. Elara threw herself into the work with intensity that surprised her. She met with survivors, developed safety protocols, created networks of safe houses and legal support. It was exhausting and heartbreaking and occasionally terrifying. It was also the first thing in her life that felt genuinely meaningful. The Foundation's official launch event was held 8 months after her father's plea agreement. Elara stood before a room full of donors and supporters, many of them the same people who'd watched her collapse at the Ashmont Ball. But she wasn't that terrified girl anymore. I started this foundation because I know what it's like to be trapped, she told them. To feel like escape is impossible, like no one will believe you, like you're worth less than the reputation of the person hurting you. I know what it's like to smile while you're dying inside. She paused, looking out at the crowd. She saw Margaret Whitmore nodding, Elena wiping tears, Patricia watching with quiet pride. And near the back, she saw Darian, who'd insisted on attending despite the ended engagement. But I also know what it's like to find people who refuse to look away, who risk their own comfort to stand between you and harm, who believe you when it's easier not to. Her voice strengthened. The Phoenix Foundation exists to be those people for women who need them. We can't save everyone, but we can save someone. And sometimes that's enough. The applause was thunderous. Donations poured in, far exceeding their initial goals. The foundation went from a hopeful startup to a viable organization in a single evening. Afterward, Darian found her in the quiet hallway outside the event space. Hell of a speech, he said. Thanks for coming. You didn't have to. I wanted to. See what you'd built. He smiled slightly. You look happy. Terrified, but happy. That pretty much sums it up. Elara leaned against the wall. How have you been? Good. Busy? The business recovered from your father's sabotage attempts. Vivian's already planning her next social campaign. He paused. We miss having you around the estate. I miss it too sometimes, but I needed space to figure out who I am without... She gestured vaguely. All of it. And who are you? Elara considered the question. I'm still figuring that out, but I'm someone who survived, someone who fought back, someone who's trying to help others do the same. She met his gaze. That's a start, at least. It's a damn good start. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Darian pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box. Before you panic, it's not what you think. He handed it to her. Just something I thought you should have. Inside was the engagement ring they'd chosen together, a simple band with a single diamond. Elara had left it behind when she moved out. Darian, I can't. It's not about the engagement. It's about what it represented. His voice was quiet. Freedom, choice. The moment you decided to fight back instead of giving up. Keep it as a reminder of that. Or sell it and put the money toward the foundation. Whatever you want, it's yours. Elara's throat tightened. Thank you. For everything. For catching me when I fell, for standing up to my father, for being a decent human being. That's a pretty low bar, Elara. You'd be surprised how rare it is. A week later, Elara received word that her father had entered federal prison to begin serving his sentence. 4 years, with possibility of parole after 2. Not nearly enough for what he'd done, but something. She didn't visit, didn't send a letter. Let the silence speak for itself. Instead, she focused on the foundation, on the women who needed help now rather than dwelling on the man who couldn't hurt her anymore. The Phoenix Foundation's first major success came 2 months after launch. A woman named Claire Martinez reached out, trapped in an abusive marriage, afraid to leave, convinced she had no options. Elara personally handled the case, coordinating safe housing, legal support, and financial assistance. Watching Claire walk away from her abuser with her head held high felt like vindication, like all the pain had been worth something. You saved her life, Elena said afterward. We saved her life, Elara corrected. This is a team effort. But that night, alone in her apartment, Elara allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transformed it into something that helped others. Her father had tried to break her, to make her worthless and dependent. Instead, she'd become someone who broke cycles, who offered hope, who proved that escape was possible. The power her father had wielded for so long, the control, the reputation, the fear he'd inspired, had shifted. He sat in a prison cell while she stood free, building something meaningful from the ruins he'd left behind. It wasn't perfect revenge, but it was something better. It was reclamation. And as Elara reviewed applications for the Foundation's next round of assistance, she felt something she'd never experienced before. Certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The girl who'd collapsed at the Ashmont ball was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that survival wasn't enough. You had to take what was done to you and transform it, use it, make it mean something. Victor Vance had spent 23 years trying to destroy his daughter. Instead, he'd forged someone unbreakable. 18 months after that first Phoenix Foundation launch, Elara stood in the construction site of what would become their permanent headquarters. A renovated historic building in the heart of the city with enough space for counseling rooms, legal offices, temporary housing, and a 24-hour crisis hotline center. The contractor says we'll be ready to move in by November, Elena reported, hard hat slightly askew on her head. Assuming the permits clear on time. They will. Patricia's on it. Elara surveyed the gutted interior, trying to imagine it filled with life and purpose. This is really happening. You sound surprised. I am, a little. A year ago, this was just an idea. Now we're building something permanent. She turned to Elena. Does that scare you, how fast it's growing? Elena smiled. Everything worth doing is scary. You taught me that. The Foundation had expanded beyond Elara's wildest projections. They'd helped 63 women escape abusive situations, provided legal assistance to dozens more, and created a network of safe houses across 3 states. The work was relentless and sometimes heartbreaking. Not every story ended well, but the successes made the failures bearable. Mostly. Elara's phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. "Dinner tonight? There's someone I'd like you to meet." She texted back confirmation, then spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing grant applications and interviewing potential counselors. The foundation's reputation had grown to the point where they could be selective, choosing staff who truly understood trauma rather than people who just needed a job. That evening, Elara arrived at Vivian's favorite restaurant to find her sitting with an elegant woman in her 40s, sharp suit, intelligent eyes, the bearing of someone used to being taken seriously. "Elara, this is Senator Marion Cross," Vivian said. "Marion, Elara Vance." They shook hands. Elara recognized the name. Cross was a rising star in state politics, known for championing women's rights legislation. "I've been following your foundation's work," Cross said as they settled into their seats. "Impressive what you've built in such a short time. We've had a lot of support and a compelling founder story." Cross's gaze was direct but not unkind. "Your testimony against your father, the public stand you took, it resonated with a lot of people. Made them pay attention to an issue they'd been ignoring." Elara felt the familiar discomfort of being defined by her trauma. "I'd rather be known for what the foundation accomplishes than for what happened to me." "Of course, but sometimes personal experience gives credibility that research alone can't." Cross leaned forward slightly. "I'm introducing legislation next session, a comprehensive domestic violence reform bill. Expanded protective orders, mandatory reporting protocols, funding for victim services. It's ambitious, and it's going to face serious opposition." "Sounds familiar. I'd like the Phoenix Foundation to be part of the coalition supporting it. Your voice, your expertise, your testimony about gaps in the current system, it could make a real difference." Elara glanced at Vivian, who nodded encouragingly. "What would that involve?" "Advocacy work, legislative testimony, public appearances to build support." Cross paused. "I won't lie. It means putting yourself back in the spotlight, reliving your story for politicians and media. It won't be easy." "Nothing worth doing is," Elara echoed Elena's words. "I'll do it." Over the next 3 months, Elara found herself in a new kind of battle, not against her father, but against a system that allowed men like him to thrive. She testified before legislative committees, spoke at rallies, gave interviews that forced her to articulate her trauma in sound bites. It was exhausting, but it was also clarifying. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of back-to-back meetings with skeptical legislators, Elara returned to her apartment to find Darian waiting in the lobby. "Before you ask how I got in, I bribed the doorman with coffee," he said, holding up 2 cups from her favorite cafe. "Stalker behavior, Wolf. Concerned friend behavior. There's a difference." He handed her a cup. "Vivian said you've been running yourself into the ground with this legislation push." "Vivian worries too much." "Vivian's usually right." Darian studied her face. "When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" Elara couldn't remember. The days had blurred together. Foundation work, legislative advocacy, media appearances, crisis calls at 3 a.m. from women who needed immediate help. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "You're burning out. I recognize the signs." Darian gestured toward the elevator. "Come on. We're going up to your apartment. You're going to eat actual food, and then you're going to sleep for 8 hours minimum. You can't just push. Watch me." She was too tired to argue. They rode the elevator in silence, and once inside her apartment, Darian ordered Thai food while Elara collapsed onto her couch. "You've been avoiding me," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I've been busy. That's what avoiding looks like when you're a workaholic." His tone was gentle. "Elara, what's going on?" She wanted to deflect, to insist everything was fine, but exhaustion had worn down her defenses. "I'm scared I'm becoming my father," she admitted quietly. Darian's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a leap. Is it?" He was obsessed with control, with building something at the expense of everything else. "And look at me. I'm working 16-hour days, sacrificing relationships and health for the foundation. How is that different?" "Intent, impact, basic human decency." Darian leaned forward. "Your father built power to dominate people. You're building something to help them. Those aren't remotely comparable." But what if I'm using the foundation the same way he used his business, as a way to avoid dealing with my own issues? Then you deal with your issues while also doing good work. They're not mutually exclusive. He paused. Are you still seeing your therapist? Elara looked away. I've been too busy. There it is. Darian's voice was firm but kind. You can't help anyone else if you're falling apart. That's not noble self-sacrifice. It's just slow-motion self-destruction. The words hit harder than expected. Elara felt tears burning behind her eyes, the first real emotion she'd allowed herself in weeks. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to be a person, and not just a survivor, or an advocate, or a symbol. Everyone wants something from me. Testimony, interviews, inspiration. And I want to give it because it helps. But I'm so tired, Darian. I'm so tired of being defined by the worst thing that ever happened to me. Then stop letting that define you. Easy to say. Not even a little bit easy, but necessary. Darian moved to sit beside her on the couch. You've built something incredible with the foundation. You're changing lives, shifting policy, making real impact. But Elara, you're allowed to also just be a person, have hobbies, date badly, watch stupid movies, exist without it being meaningful or productive. I don't know how to do that. Then learn. The same way you learned everything else. One small step at a time. The food arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence. Afterward, Darian made her promise to call her therapist in the morning, then left with a reminder to actually sleep. Alone in her apartment, Elara looked around at the space she'd created. It was beautiful but sterile, like a hotel room, not a home. No photos, no personal touches, nothing that revealed who she was beyond a woman rebuilding her life. Maybe Darian was right. Maybe she'd been so focused on not being her father that she'd forgotten to be anyone at all. The next morning, she called Dr. Sarah Chen, her therapist. I was wondering when you'd resurface, Dr. Chen said dryly. 3 months is a long time between sessions. I know, I'm sorry. Don't apologize, just show up. A pause. Tomorrow, 4 o'clock. And Elara, bring the real you, not the polished advocate version. That session was brutal. Dr. Chen didn't let her hide behind foundation work or legislative victories. She pushed Elara to confront the grief she'd been avoiding, grief for the father she'd never had, the childhood she'd lost, the years spent surviving instead of living. You're allowed to mourn what you didn't get, Dr. Chen said, even while being grateful for what you have now. It feels selfish. There are women who have it so much worse. Your pain doesn't diminish theirs, and their suffering doesn't invalidate yours. Dr. Chen's voice was firm. You can't heal if you won't acknowledge the wounds. The work was hard. Harder than testifying, harder than confronting her father, harder than anything Elara had done. But slowly, she started to untangle who she was from what had happened to her. She started painting, something she'd loved as a child before her father decided art was frivolous. The paintings were terrible, but making them felt good. She joined a book club with people who had no idea who she was, who didn't care about her foundation or her testimony or her tragic backstory. She went on a few dates. Most were awkward disasters, but one, with a pediatric surgeon named Maya, showed promise. They got coffee, then dinner, then a weekend trip to the coast where they mostly just talked and laughed and existed without agenda. I like you, Maya said one evening as they watched the sunset from her porch. Not because you're impressive or inspirational, just because you're you. Elara didn't know how to respond. Being liked for herself, not for her story or her work or what she represented, felt foreign and wonderful and terrifying. I like you too, she finally said. Meanwhile, Senator Cross's legislation was gaining momentum. Public hearings drew overflow crowds. Survivors testified about systemic failures. Even some conservative legislators, swayed by constituent pressure, began supporting the bill. Elara found herself at the center of it all, but no longer feeling like she was drowning. She testified clearly and powerfully, but she also knew when to step back and let others lead. She did interviews, but set boundaries about what she would and wouldn't discuss. She learned slowly to be both a survivor and a person. The vote came on a cold November afternoon. Elara watched from the Senate gallery as legislators debated, argued, and finally voted. The bill passed by a narrow margin. Not everything they'd hoped for, but a significant step forward. Afterward, Senator Cross found her in the hallway. We did it. You did it. I just helped. Don't sell yourself short. Your testimony turned votes. Cross smiled. This is just the beginning, you know. There's still federal legislation to consider, other states to work with. I know, and I'll help however I can. Elara paused. But on my terms, with boundaries. Because I'm learning that I'm more useful alive and healthy than burnt out and broken. Fair enough. The movement needs sustained effort, not martyrs. That evening, the Phoenix Foundation threw a celebration at their new headquarters, finally finished and operational. Staff, donors, survivors, and supporters packed the space. Elara moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and feeling genuinely happy for the first time in recent memory. Vivian found her near the refreshment table. Your father's parole hearing is next month. The words landed like ice water. Elara had known it was coming. 2 years into his 4-year sentence, Victor was eligible for early release, but she'd been trying not to think about it. I know. Are you planning to attend? You have the right to give a victim impact statement. I don't know. Part of me wants to face him one more time. Prove I'm not afraid anymore. Elara took a sip of champagne. But part of me thinks the best revenge is just living well, not giving him any more of my time or energy. Both are valid choices. What would you do? Vivian considered. I'd think about what serves you best, not what makes a point, not what looks strong to observers, what actually helps you move forward. Over the next few weeks, Elara wrestled with the decision. She talked it through with Dr. Chen, with Maya, with Elena. She made lists of pros and cons. She imagined both scenarios, attending the hearing versus staying away. Finally, she made her choice. The parole hearing was held in a stark conference room inside the federal prison. Victor sat across from the parole board, looking older and smaller than Elara remembered. Prison had worn him down, the distinguished bearing replaced by something diminished, almost pathetic. Elara sat in the gallery with Patricia beside her, watching as the board reviewed his case. Good behavior, participation in rehabilitation programs, remorse expressed for his crimes. Then they called for victim statements. Patricia stood. My client has prepared a statement to be entered into the record, but she won't be reading it in person. The board member looked confused. Is Ms. Vance present? I am, Elara said, standing, but I'm not here to beg you to keep him locked up. I'm here because I wanted to see him one last time, to remind myself that he's just a man, not a monster, not a force of nature, just a man who made terrible choices and is facing consequences. She looked at her father. He met her gaze briefly, then looked away. For 23 years, he controlled my life through fear and violence, Elara continued. And for the past 2 years, I've been learning to live without that control. I've built a career helping others escape what I escaped. I've found relationships based on respect instead of domination. I've discovered who I am when I'm not just trying to survive. She paused, making sure her voice stayed steady. Whether you grant parole or not doesn't change my life anymore. He can't hurt me from in here, and if he's released, the protective order ensures he can't hurt me out there. So this isn't about revenge or justice. This is just me closing a chapter. Victor finally looked up, and for just a moment, Elara saw something in his expression. Regret, maybe, or recognition of what he'd lost. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, she told him. Peace, redemption, understanding. Whatever helps you live with what you've done. But I'm done carrying your weight. I'm done letting your choices define my life. She sat down. The hearing continued, but Elara barely heard it. She'd said what she needed to say, and now it was finished. The board denied parole. Victor would serve his full sentence. Outside the prison, Patricia squeezed her shoulder. How do you feel? Free, Elara said, and meant it. 6 months later, the Phoenix Foundation opened its 3rd location and launched a national training program for domestic violence advocates. Elara stood at the podium during the press conference, fielding questions with the ease of someone who'd learned to own her story without being owned by it. What's next for the foundation? A reporter asked. Expansion, education, and systemic change. We're working with Senator Cross on federal legislation. We're developing best practices for law enforcement response to domestic calls. And we're continuing to provide direct services to women who need immediate help. Elara smiled. We're in this for the long haul. And personally, what's next for Elara Vance? She thought about Maya, about the life they were building together, about the painting classes she'd started teaching at a community center. About the book she'd been writing, not a memoir, but fiction inspired by survival and transformation. Living, she said simply, just living. That evening, she attended the annual Thornberry Masquerade, the same event where she'd confronted her father 2 years earlier, but this time she arrived as Duchess Elara Wolfe, not because she'd actually married Darian. That engagement had ended as planned, and they'd remained close friends. But Vivian had formally adopted Elara 6 months ago in a private ceremony that left both of them crying. The legal technicality gave Elara the Wolfe name and the family she'd never had. "Ready?" Vivian asked, adjusting her mask. "For a party full of people who watched my public breakdown? Absolutely." They entered together, Vivian elegant in emerald green, Elara stunning in deep burgundy. The crowd parted, but this time the whispers were different. "That's the woman who started the Phoenix Foundation. I heard she personally helped 50 women escape abuse. Senator Cross says her testimony was crucial for the legislation." Elara moved through the ballroom with her head high, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about the foundation's work. Margaret Whitmore found her near the champagne fountain. "You've certainly made waves," Margaret said, but her tone was approving rather than malicious. "The old guard didn't know what to do with you at first, but you forced us all to pay attention to issues we'd been politely ignoring. Good. Polite ignorance protects abusers." "Indeed, Margaret raised her glass. "To uncomfortable truths and the women brave enough to speak them." They toasted. As the evening wore on, Elara found herself genuinely enjoying the event. Not because she needed society's approval, but because she'd learned to exist in these spaces on her own terms. Near midnight, she slipped out to the gardens, the same spot where she'd stood with Darian after confronting her father, but now she was alone, looking up at the stars and marveling at how different everything felt. "Penny for your thoughts?" She turned to find Darian approaching, handsome in his tuxedo. "Just thinking about the first time I was here, how terrified I was, how certain I was that I'd never escape. And now I know escape was just the beginning." She smiled. "The hard part was figuring out what to do with freedom once I had it." "And have you figured it out?" "Mostly. I'm building something meaningful with the foundation. I'm learning to have relationships that aren't based on fear or control. I'm discovering who I am when I'm not in survival mode." She paused. "It's messier than I expected, less triumphant, more complicated. But it's mine." Darian nodded. "That's all any of us can ask for." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Elara spoke again. "Thank you for catching me that night, for standing up to my father, for helping me see that I was worth fighting for. You figured that out yourself. I just provided convenient support. Still, you changed my life. We changed each other's lives." Darian smiled slightly. "I was stuck before you collapsed into my arms, going through motions, avoiding anything meaningful because meaningful meant risk. You reminded me that some things are worth the risk." "What are you risking now?" "I'm starting a nonprofit too, working with young men from abusive backgrounds, helping them break cycles before they perpetuate them." He looked almost embarrassed. "Seemed like I should stop talking about systemic change and actually do something." "That's incredible." "It's a start. You're still way ahead of me in the world-changing department." Music drifted from the ballroom, a waltz, slow and elegant. Darian held out his hand. "Dance with me?" Not as a fake fiancé or a rescuer or anything symbolic, just as friends who've been through hell and came out the other side. Elara took his hand. They moved through the garden in time with the distant music, and for those few minutes, everything felt simple and right. When the song ended, Darian bowed formally. "Thank you for the dance, Duchess Wolfe." "Anytime, Lord Wolfe." He returned to the party, leaving Elara alone in the garden once more. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through messages, updates from the foundation, a sweet text from Maya, photos from Elena of their newest safe house. Her life had become fuller than she'd ever imagined possible. Not perfect. She still had nightmares sometimes, still struggled with trust, still caught herself falling into old survival patterns. But she was learning, growing, becoming. A notification appeared. A woman named Sarah had just called the crisis hotline, desperate for help leaving her husband. The on-call counselor had handled the immediate situation, but they wanted Elara's input on long-term placement. She could ignore it until morning. could enjoy the party, let someone else handle it. But that's not who she was anymore. Elara made the call, coordinating with staff to ensure Sarah had safe housing by tomorrow. Then she sent a quick text to Vivian explaining she was leaving early, called for her car, and headed to the Foundation's headquarters. The building was quiet this late, just the overnight crisis staff manning phones. Elara settled at her desk and pulled up Sarah's file, reviewing her situation and mapping out next steps. This was her life now, not glamorous galas and society approval, though those had their place. Not revenge against her father, though justice had been served. Her life was late nights, ensuring frightened women had somewhere safe to sleep. It was policy fights and fundraising campaigns, and the endless, exhausting work of changing systems that protected abusers. It was messy and complicated, and sometimes heartbreaking. It was everything she'd never known she wanted. 3 years after collapsing at the Ashmont Ball, Elara stood in front of her bathroom mirror in the Foundation headquarters. She'd just finished a 16-hour day, legislative testimony in the morning, crisis intervention in the afternoon, evening gala to accept an award for the Foundation's work. She looked tired. Her hair was escaping its professional updo, and her makeup needed touching up. But when she met her own gaze, she didn't see the broken girl who'd once stood in similar mirrors, counting bruises and planning survival. She saw someone who'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into purpose. Someone who'd learned that survival wasn't enough. You had to live, to build, to create meaning from pain. Her phone buzzed. Maya. Dinner's ready when you get home. Made your favorite. Home. The word still felt new, foreign, but Elara was learning to accept it. The apartment she shared with Maya, filled with books and paintings and laughter. The chosen family she'd built with Vivian and Elena and Patricia. The community of survivors who'd become colleagues and friends. Home wasn't a place. It was the space she'd created where fear couldn't touch her, where love was freely given, where she was valued for who she was rather than what she could provide. Elara left the building and stepped into the cool night air. Above her, stars scattered across the dark sky. The same stars that had watched her collapse, had witnessed her confrontation with her father, had seen every moment of her transformation. She'd fallen once, in front of everyone who mattered, and she'd risen stronger than anyone, including herself, had thought possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More women needing help, more battles to fight, more work to do. But tonight, Elara Wolf walked toward home with her head high and her heart full. She'd been broken, she'd been rebuilt, and now she was building something that would outlast them both. Her and her father, something that would help countless others find their own paths from survival to freedom. The girl who'd collapsed at that gala was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that sometimes falling was just the beginning, that being caught was a gift, and that rising again was a choice you made every single day. Elara made that choice, and this time she would never fall again.